Well, hello there, Dr. Miller here with a video number 2 in the sports nutrition series on protein. I start out workout carbs because I think they're underrated. Protein is not overrated, it's just talked about a lot, so I thought I'd leave it for the second one. By the way, if you haven't already, subscribed to my channel. Remember, we're trying to get to 1,000 subs. I got to get the Lambo, man. Okay? And according to YouTube, when you hit 1,000 subs, all your dreams come true. Your life turns into a Disney movie. The old ones. The new ones are terrible. But the old ones, it's just good. So I need you to help me. Together, we're going to do it. And I get all the rewards. Okay? You just get more videos, which is a reward, right? I mean, that's very much. Okay. Smack the bell. Share this video. Whatever you think is necessary and appropriate. Please do so. You can wait till after the video to see if you like it, though. You don't have to make that kind of early commitment. I did want to do a rider to my first video on carbs. I didn't really specify carbohydrate workout carbs during endurance training, but just keep in mind that for most people, the kind of endurance, kind of the LIS, the LIS training, right, low intensity steady state training, 15 grams per 30 minutes is plenty, even a little bit less perhaps. I would recommend some though, especially up to 30 minutes. If you're doing like 15 minutes, and yeah, that one, you know, if that's like a post-resistance training thing, just drink your regular 1/3 after. You should be fine. If you really want to try to enhance everything, though, yes, maybe 10 grams. But it's so dependent on intensity. But if you're a competitive runner or endurance athlete, you probably already are familiar with the high number, like the carbs that you could ingest. We're scaling up now to 60 grams, per 30 minutes even. Like ridiculous amounts. Now, that's not for everybody. That's for somebody really getting after it, running close to threshold, race pace, right? 60 grams per hour might be more appropriate. But when you think about this, think of somebody with like that's 160, 70, 80, pounds and lighter. That's a lot of carbohydrates. So you just have to justify them, right? And that video I made, the last video, wasn't specifying on endurance athletes, okay? Because that is going to be a different category. All right, that's a different category. So just to make that clear, traditional cardio, that 15 gram rule is a good one up to 30 minutes. And anything over that, if you're working the whole time, if you're doing a book reading pace, like I said, you probably could scale it back a little bit. But I would encourage workout carbs even during those sessions. I usually use like a 10 gram per 30 minutes. If I don't know the pace that somebody's going to be operating in, but I know it's going to be probably kind of slow, that's a good range at 10 to 15 grams. Okay, I repeated myself like 3 times, but I think you get the idea. All right, let's get into protein. I'm going to go over, obviously, like last video, how much, what type, when to take it. Okay. Now, one of the obvious limitations with protein is it's expensive. Powders, protein sources themselves, especially now, the time I'm recording this is 2022, they can be challenging. And so that could be a natural lid on how much you can consume. Okay. If that's the case, then really optimizing how often you consume it can be really helpful. Okay. All right. So how much? Well, there's been some debate on this there. If you look at the RDA for protein, it's like 0.8 per gram per kilo per day. That's a general kind of, that's ridiculously low. Don't do that. Okay. It's actually annoying that that's still there. 0.8 to 1.0. Like, oof, that's like nothing. Okay. Even for somebody who's sedentary, that's a horrible idea, just because if we're trying to control appetite, right, which is one of the powers of protein, okay? So briefly, power protein, appetite control of its weight loss, but we're talking about sports nutrition here. We're trying to repair muscles, and I'm going to probably allude to muscle protein breakdown and muscle protein synthesis. I'm going to make a separate video on that, but just think building muscle for right now, okay? So 1.5 grams per kilogram per day is thought to be like this optimal zone, and people argue over this, whether we need more than that. Even though there's research literature that supports that more can be warranted. My range is up to 2.0, 2.2 grams per kilo. That's usually the max. Now, does that mean somebody could go higher than that? Sure, they could. It's just one of those, it's kind of like we talk about junk volumes, that junk protein. More is better, especially for those who are training a lot and have been training for a long time. If you're a newbie, 1.5 is plenty. Okay. If you're trying to gain muscle mass, or just recover if you're not trying to even gain muscle mass. If you're an endurance athlete, that's a good range to be in as well, because you're beating up muscles too and turning them over. You're not trying to gain mass. But if you're trying to extend volume, if you're trying to grow muscle, if you're in a weight loss situation where you're trying to maintain muscle mass, and perhaps if you're just starting out and build some, 1.5 is a good place. for that person, if you are in a cut though and you've been training for a long time, you may want to scale it up to 2.0, 2.2 grams per kilogram. Okay. I've seen some crazy protein numbers over the years, 150 gram meals. Some IFBB pros trying to train people that are just unreal amounts of protein compared to their body size. Okay. So that's a general range you can stick with. I feel comfortable with it. I've seen a research study up to 5.6 grams per kilogram per day in it was a group of South Korean bodybuilders, I think it was. And they were looking at kidney function. That's a good idea. And they were fine, by the way. But just keep in mind, there is probably something to more is better, but you have to justify it. You have to be able to afford it. Okay. And there's obviously going to be a point where, again, you kind of are wading through the mud so much, like, I'm not really getting as much out of this as I'm investing. I can maybe look at some other ways to do things. Okay. So just keep that in mind. Let me just put a note about amino acids here. I know now we're on essential amino acids. Just take a whole protein source. This is why whey protein is much better than those two sources. And I know the whole argument, well, I won't get all the other stuff with the essential amino acids. Take the whey protein if you want to gain mass. Okay. That's my advice to you. Get all the proteins. You need them all. Even the non-essential ones are good to ingest. I know they're non-essential, which means you can make them, but still, right? Get a complete protein profile. Better eat the real food because now you get the right proportion of each amino acid, right? You could flood your body with one of the important amino acids I'll talk about in a second, but you still have to have the others. Okay. So anyway, daily protein source, or daily protein 1.5 to 2.5 grams per kilogram. Now, obviously, better cover everything about protein in this video, but hopefully that's helpful to start. Okay, next thing is protein sources, since I started talking about supplements. When possible, real food is best. Okay. Red meat is, again, the caution with red meat, of course, is over one serving per day. There's, I'd say, a convincing amount of research that says it's not a good idea, especially if you're not eating fruits and vegetables. Okay. It's really not a good idea more than one serving per day of processed meat. It's like your sausages, stuff like that. I would limit that to no more than one per day. Colorectal cancer, cardiovascular disease are the two big problems with overconsumption. Even if you have high vegetable intake, it seems to be over one serving per day can be detrimental to health. So I highly recommend not consuming red meat and certainly not processed meat more than once a day. Now, does that mean if you have like burgers twice a day on one day, you're going to get colorectal cancer? Of course not. But just to be, and of course there's a genetic factor and all those things. You may be able to eat 15 cheeseburgers a day and live to your 85 and never get colorectal cancer. It's possible. But if we're just going with the odds here, I would highly recommend limiting to one today. Now, other protein sources, of course, now you get into poultry classes. And I know there's some talk about, red meat sources producing more full muscles, and it probably has to do with a little bit of the fat intake that has to do with testosterone levels and has to do with depending on what kind of beef you're talking about, like grass-fed versus grain-fed, all those things. I get it. I know these arguments exist. I'm just making general claims here. Like if I was going to advise somebody, I'm advising you, still limit to more than one red meat portion per day. Okay. But again, all the other poultry classes, turkey, bison, again, somebody's falling red meat. Turkey, I know there's arguments over turkey. I would still call that more the poultry class. Of course, fish, I would limit that to one a day as well, just because of the potential for contamination. Fish is one of the most contaminated protein sources there is. I'm not one of those super conspiracy about everything food, but this is still something to kind of keep in mind. Plant sources are good too to mix in, but if possible, eat animal sources. And of course, dairy is a great place to go for a lot of these proteins as well. Okay, so with dairy, keep them low fat if possible. But there's plenty of good protein sources out there to sample and go across. I didn't mention all of them, of course, but I did want to highlight red meat, non-fat dairy, right? And then working some plant sources is good. Now, I'm not going to talk about plant-based diets in this video. That's a whole nother ball of wax. It's a little bit harder to get protein in. I've worked and continue to work with plant-based diet folks, and it's tough to gain mass. Not impossible, but it's tough. It's tougher. Okay. Again, I'm assuming the people I'm listening to here are natty as well. So if somebody's on anabolic steroids, that changes the formulas a lot. Okay, next thing. So we have some protein sources that are kind of general, eat real food when possible. And by the way, the reason for that is it's slow in your gut. If you're trying to lose weight, this is a good idea too, because it'll keep you fuller longer. But also think of this as kind of a slow release. When you eat protein sources, it goes through you a lot slower. This is where you like mixing. You can remember, we kind of isolate food sometimes, like something like white rice. Everybody's afraid of it. Like if you eat it with a protein source, it's going to slow down your gut, right? And in many ways, white rice is better than brown rice. I'm just using an example. That gastric emptying, as we call it, right, is better with protein source that's solid. This is, this is a good thing. Outside of training. Now, during training, along with your workout carbs, the same kind of configuration of 2/3 during, 1/3 after. The pre, 1/3 before is probably not as big of a deal. I'm not saying it isn't, but it's probably more important if you haven't had any protein at all for the day. Might be a good idea to sip in 1/3 of your protein, right, before training. But otherwise, you're good to go to like 2/3 protein, 1/3 of your protein drink after. Now we want to weigh. Now we're talking about during training now. You want a possible whey. Okay, if you have some sort of reaction whey, you could look into some of the soy-based, pea protein-based protein. Just realize you're probably going to have to take more of them, especially the pea protein, just because they're not as complete as the whey. But the whey, now we want a fast absorbed protein source. We don't want slow, and obviously you don't want to lift with the full stomach necessarily. So liquid, powder, fast. Okay, and whey itself is fast. So whey is part of milk protein. Casein's the other one, which is more of the slow release. Even in powder form, it's in water. It's going to be just by its construction, by its chemistry, it's going to be a slower release. So whey is fast into the body right now. Okay. Now, this is at the minimum 20 grams. Okay. And I'm talking about weight training specifically, but even if you did some hard cardio training, okay, I realize, like if you're out for a run, you don't want to maybe slam protein, but post exercise, at least 20 grams. Let's say you had a hard 3 mile, 5K type of run, 20 grams, that would be a good idea as well. Okay. But that's kind of like the basement for a real legitimate. Now, if you're just doing the easy cycle, reading your book, cardiovascular training, right, you might scale it down to 10 grams after with your workout carbs, right? I'd still recommend, especially if you can't eat right after, recommend consuming some whey protein if it's 10 to 15 grams, which is not very much, after an easy cardio session. If you anticipate, I'm not going to be able to eat for like 2 or 3 hours, have a protein shake, even after that. Okay. Because I'm talking about muscle protein breakdown and synthesis briefly in just a minute. So, in terms of like range then, well, how much more well, just like with the workout carbs, it depends on how long you're going to train and how big you are. Okay. The same kind of rules apply as the workout carbs. General rules now. Okay. That if you, the body size outline last time, you start with 20 grams now, and you can add 10 grams for every 50 pounds of body weight, over 150, and over 2 bills. Okay. So, 150 for a woman, 200 pounds for a man. All right. That's for 30 minutes. Now for every extra 30 minutes, okay, you can add another 10 grams as well. So again, if you're a 200 pound man and you're exercise for an hour, a general rule then would be about 40 grams. Okay. General. Now, if anything with protein, depends on who you ask, I guess. I say you could scale it down a little bit, but, that 20 to 40 gram range is usually going to be pretty good for your typical training session. If you go like 3 hours, I have individuals who work with that. We'll do like 2.5 hour, 3 hour CrossFit training sessions, or, longer or more intense weight training sessions up to like 1.5 hours. I know they're going to be intense. Well, yeah, you could scale up a little bit if you were a bigger person. Okay. Those are some general rules. So 20 grams, 40 grams, the in between is determined by your body size and how long your training session is. So hopefully that's helpful. Now, what's really potent, I mentioned amino acids and essentials. Leucine is one of the branched chain amino acids. Did I say amino? I think I just said amino acids. I meant to say branched chain amino acids. Branched chain versus essential amino acids. When the branched chain amino acid, leucine is the most potent. And it is. It's absolutely very potent in terms of hypertrophy. Just remember that you need the other proteins. Or so when you're looking at some of these powders, I was jacked full of leucine. Okay, that's fine, but are there adequate amounts of the other proteins? And that's, you have to be careful with that, right? Falling in love with one amino, because remember, you need all of them, especially the essential ones, meaning your body can't make them. Okay. So that's some general recommendations in terms of during. Okay. During is that range. The same 2/3 during, 1/3 after. You could do one half during, one half after. If you're like, I don't want to have all that protein on, that's fine. But that's a general range. Now, some people mix their protein with their workout carbs. Some don't like to do that. Right. I mentioned before somebody ate cereal with it. That's basically how they mix the two. They got their workout carbs and they got their whey protein and some casein as a result. This is also, when we kind of get into the post training session, just like with workout carbs, you have that real sensitive time when you can pull in amino acids. You also have, getting into the muscle synthesis and breakdown is, after a hard training session, think of it as a balance of pluses and minuses. The plus is muscle protein synthesis, making protein. Breakdown is taking away. Well, obviously, if you've trained hard, especially if you haven't had adequate protein during or carbohydrate, you can expect to have muscle protein breakdown very high compared to muscle synthesis. So this idea that you're not adequately refilling your muscle, you're not adequately recovering. This is why you need that fast protein source to reduce muscle protein breakdown and to maximize muscle protein synthesis. Okay, so this is why these protein powders are so important, and research literature supports their effectiveness. There is some debate on whether the carb-protein combo is needed, but at the very worst with the carbs, it's energy to train harder, right? We can talk. I'll talk about creatine later, but there's always a move towards supplements quickly. Like, I got to use a supplement. I know protein powder is a supplement. I get it, but if you can get basic macro things in order, meaning workout carbs, and protein powder in order, and keep them consistent, you will see better growth over time doing that rather than being erratic with some of these supplements like creatine, where like, I can't afford it anymore. I don't want to do this anymore. Okay, well, then you're going to lose the gains. Where something like this, something being protein powder and workout carbs, basic macros, is going to be more effective. Okay, so it's about 17 minutes now. I'm going to leave it there. I know I didn't talk about protein. Well, I'll say one more thing because I want to. What about protein in the other parts of the day? And I'll get maybe this in more of a video, but in a general rule, I'll give you a general rule here, is try to eat the next meal, the actual real protein source, within an hour of the completion of your training session. Closer to 30 minutes is better. An hour is, a little more realistic sometimes. Okay. So like your actual meal, that's next. Okay. Now, in terms of your daily protein allocation, all right, you want to try to eat a protein source every 3 to 5 hours, okay, if possible. Every 3 to 5 hours, eat a breakfast. Every 3 to 5 hours from then, eat a meal, if possible. Some meals may not be perfect, right, but eat a meal. Things like intermittent fasting, the research literature has I haven't seen anything convincing me one or the other, but I think the concern I have, because the studies that we have are not long-term per se, is that if you do something like intermittent fasting, you have muscle protein breakdown start to increase over time by not eating protein. So even when you're not training. And so this is why having that constant, think of it, availability of amino acids to build and maintain protein. So tipping the scale towards that muscle protein synthesis as much as possible for as long as possible during the day, right? This is where like anabolic steroids, you don't have to worry about that as much because you're just always in muscle protein synthesis, right? And so, that's cheating, right? That way. And so that's why, but it works. Okay. That's why it's illegal. Most of the good supplements that are, the good ones work, are illegal. With a small handful like creatine that are in that kind of weird land where they actually work and are legal. But anyway, just keep that in mind that, you want to try to eat protein as often as possible, even if it's a little disjointed, meaning like you might have a larger meal and a smaller meal. Now, back to that, if I mentioned before the IFBB big meals, right? Large protein sources. As a general rule, even if you're a big person, I would not consume more than 42 grams per meal. And for most people, if you're not a large person, okay, and then what does that mean? Like the 200-pound man, 150-pound woman, you probably want to keep it around 24, maybe 30 grams max per meal. Okay, so if you think about it, 30 grams per meal, a 150-pound person, right? 5 meals, that's 150 grams of protein. That would be that 1 gram per pound of body weight per day range. That includes workout carbs too, or workout protein, whey protein as well. Okay. So, that's a kind of a good place to, a good guidance, I guess, is just that even spread out. And if you're like, this whole whey protein thing's throwing you, just treat that as another meal. And that individual might have 30 grams of whey protein at 150 pounds, but I mean, I'll use the word fine there, not because I don't care, but it'll be fine. Right. So keep that in mind. All right. That protein, should be spread out as much as possible. Sometimes you don't have that option. I get it. Sometimes life doesn't afford that. Then you can still consume those protein sources lumped in those other meals. If you only have 3 meals, still consume the protein per day. Even if there is a lid on how much you can absorb, you're trying to max out every time you have a meal there, right? But it's not ridiculous. So back to the example, you might be consuming 40 grams per meal because you have to have one less meal per day. That's okay. It's still, even if you only can absorb 36 grams, at least you're getting an adequate amount without being ridiculous and trying to eat 50 grams per meal. Like, it's way over what you need. Okay, and can absorb. So hope that makes sense. Protein is not overrated, but it can be sensationalized sometimes, right? It's become kind of a cultural thing to have protein, and again, it's effective. I'm not saying it isn't. Just keep in mind that let how much you consume per day follow your training status and your goals, as opposed to just, I'm going to blast 200 grams per day and I weigh 150 pounds. Okay. Might be a little bit of overkill. Okay. You don't need that much to see the kind of progress you want. Might you have to? Weigh 160 pounds now, need that 200 grams at some point? Maybe, but again, it depends on your goals. Okay. Depends on your goals. All right. I'll leave it there. I think I covered everything I wanted to at least talk about. We could talk more about protein, of course. Other sources, I mentioned before, plant-based sources. Some other timing issues, casein before bed, that kind of stuff. I'll leave that for now since I'm at 20 minutes. YouTube says that if you want a Lambo, you're not really supposed to make videos over 10 minutes, but I don't care. I'll laugh all the way to the bank in my Lambo. Okay. I'll see you guys in the next video. If you have any questions, leave them in the comment, and I'll follow up with another video. If I was ambiguous about something or wandered in the weeds too far, or just want some different information and go in a different direction, just let me know. Happy to do that.